willing to entertain the possibility that emptiness is a true thing, and it is describing reality. If you just think maybe that's so, that kind of doubt is so powerful that it has the ability to use the phrase, it will shred, it will, tear apart samsara, meaning it will destroy samsara. It means even that doubt alone it has that unique benefit to it. It is that knowledge is so important. And he says, the person of little virtue doesn't even have the ability to entertain the possibility that emptiness is the nature of reality. They just won't even consider it. It's like, it couldn't be. It couldn't be that things are empty. And that person, as indicative of the person who's not even willing to entertain the idea or the maybe there's such a thing as emptiness. So it is that description is meant to indicate how important it is. So if we learn about emptiness, so it's a process. Learning about emptiness is something that you need to do. You need to be persistent. You need to you need to do it continually, and then eventually you will begin to understand. And the amazing quality is, the ultimate goal is to gain direct realization of emptiness, and that is a very high level of realization. But even at the level of ordinary awareness, our ordinary way of thinking rationally, if we gain a correct understanding of emptiness, not even at the level of knowledge, not even at the level of true inferential knowledge, but just understanding really what emptiness, the meaning of emptiness actually is. If we begin to gain that kind of understanding, the effect that it will have is, there's a phrase, the mental afflictions have two, they have two modes. So the mental afflictions have a manifest or an active mode. So when we're angry or when we're manifesting desire or ignorance, then that is the overt form of the mental affliction. So we can counteract the overt form of the mental afflictions and cause them to become inactive. So it's like we can get over an angry spell and then regain our calm state of mind. So in that point, we're no longer overtly angry, but the seeds of anger, the capacity to become angry still exists. So if the conditions that will provoke our anger present themselves again, then we are likely to become angry again. But the nature of just having a reasonably clear understanding of emptiness, not high knowledge, just clear understanding of it, if we can hold that in our minds, that has the extraordinary ability to keep all the mental afflictions at bay. And it means that we are able to suppress the mental afflictions in a positive way. A lot of times psychologists say suppressing emotions is not a good thing. But if you know how to suppress the emotions effectively in a way that you can keep them from arising, that is a good thing. And if you gain a clear understanding of emptiness, just holding that understanding has the ability to potentially be exposed to some situation that might provoke one of the mental afflictions, but because of your understanding of emptiness, you will be able to maintain self-control and avoid having the mental afflictions arise. So that's what it means to suppress. And that's a very huge skill and ability to develop. Prajnaparamita, Sindayas, what said it, that said the Jungate, that was our Junior, Purple, Junet, Nama, Sherash, the Chimney was, that they did his child for what? Do you do that? Banga, what is you do? Banga, what is you do? Junet, Demas, Junet, Dema, Banga, what did? And then, has over Tenja, Swedish, Paramita. Paramita is to purchase it. Sindayas in the Kataji, new bosses. What do you do? Kataji, Sudom, and Shay, Jude Dama, Sheriff Japan, the Chimney, new boss. What do you do? Kataji, and the Diga Suda? Sheriff Japan, the Chimney, Pushi, Kataji, she's in the ship. She's in, or she's in ship, she's in the Lion. Other people the Chashawayna. Shilling Chashaway, she, Shum Shi said, Shum Shi, the la. Shum Shi, Ramishi, Shum Shi, Lamishi, Jum Shi, Tajirish Wayna, Tajirish Wayna, delegation. Ramishi is the Ramishi, and there's Ramishi is Chihuahua. He that Shum Shi said, and they have a children, they will tell them, and they shoot the last shoe shaking that and generally some water then also to look at shoe shaking travel. I see you wanted the colors and Sanju sing is in the Castle, do you do the the much singing is in there, do you do that? Do you do the issue? That's she is the she did that, and she says, she said, lazy the cheese yield. Or lazy the cheese yield. How do the cheese Sivajilata, Chinja yield? Chinja la boy, and the near Chinja. Chinja so teaches in the same. Teaches in the same doing the nations of the Dutch job in the kitchen. Chinja de la Dutch and Joseph changing the Soma. Chinsis the Castle Jewish over. Or the Lamish that. Lamish said that and she did the council. Chinjas child. Or the she Shella part of the Chibas, Navi, part of the Chibas, Hog part of the Chiba, Chintaja, part of the Koya part of and Joba singing corner. What? Or the she's only the council and not only the she's and the day she has water as the Shella she's whatever, Shushin. All the shares part of Chip and Nimbos, all this part of Sia and Nimbo used to they have a shooting at the did not send you Juicy Chas, that Juicy Chas you do, took the council took them my shares for the Chip and Chas. I was like, I did was our Juicy when you come in. What did this? What did it? That's it, you said the teacher. So, what is proposed is to follow the kind of outline of one of the commentaries on the Heart Sutra. This particular commentary is by a scholar named Jorden Lama Dr. Shidru. He was from, I think, the 17th century, fairly early, and he's from Saramay, so we have a special liking for Saramay.
he
said, I'm the Buddha. He's not him, I'm the Buddha. Okay, I'll buy that. So anyway, he was an extraordinary scholar. He had a large collection of works. Anyway, don't need to take time talking about him. At any rate, he's saying, this is his commentary. It's about 27 pages. It's fairly long, and we're not going to be able to read the entire commentary word for word in the time that we have allotted. So he says basically he's going to try to follow the main structure of it. And so starts out that he actually has a section where he talks about, like who's the suitable person and why we need to study the Prajnaparamita Sutra. What's the importance of it? So he has a section on that. So we're skipping that. And then the second main section is the main subject matter itself. And so then that means that's the body of the scripture itself. So he says that section has three parts to it. One is describing the title, the name of the sutra, and then one section is talking about the contents of the scripture, what the words actually say, and then there's a concluding section, which talks about, those who are familiar with it, so then after Buddha comes out of his concentration.
No.
So those are the three main divisions of the description of the subject, the main scripture itself. So talking about the title, so there's a convention in Tibetan, the Tibetan, tradition, going back to the time when the scriptures were being translated, that every treatise, every sutra or tantra, and every philosophical treatise that was translated from Sanskrit or an Indian language, they wanted to be able to identify it as having come from India, because that's where Buddhism, Buddhism was transmitted to Tibet, and so to kind of pay homage to where the material originally came from and the language that it was originally written in, all the works start out with the title written in the original name, and then the title translated into Tibetan. So the title, as it says in Tibetan, it says Gyadar Kedu. Gyadar Kedu means in the language of Gyadar. Gyadar is in Tibetan for India. So in the language of India, and then they use the full name. The name is Arya Bhagavati Prajnaparamita Hridaya Sutra Nama. And then in Tibetan, they'll translate each word. So they'll say, Bhagavati translates as Jorden Dhamma. And there's a reason for saying it. So Jorden Dhamma, Jorden Dem is Bhagavan, right? In Sanskrit, means the Lord. It's usually an epithet that's used for the Buddha. So they call the Prajnaparamita, they use the feminine, Bhagavati. So it means you can say like the feminine divine one, because they one of the ways of referring to Prajnaparamita is the mother of the Buddhas, in the sense that the wisdom of Prajnaparamita is what generates and gives birth to the realization of the Buddhas. So they use that as the name, part of the name of Prajnaparamita Sutra. Okay, so then Prajnaparamita is the last of the 6 paramitas. It means the perfection. Usually it's translated, paramita is translated as perfection. The perfection of wisdom. And then hridaya, or ningwo, it means the essence. So basically in the commentary saying that what the Tibetan word that corresponds to this Sanskrit word is this, and this Sanskrit word is this. And then he starts out by saying, the title gives the original Sanskrit name, which in Tibetan tradition they identify the languages of India as being the 4 main types. We could make a joke about it, but I will not. So there's Sanskrit, there's Pali, there's Prakrit, and there's Abhisamaya. Those are the 4 main languages that are identified as the languages in which there are a lot of Buddhist texts that are written. So the Abhisamaya and Prakrit are in Tibetan they would call them Surke. Then the 2 main canonical languages are Sanskrit and Pali. But almost everything that was translated into Tibetan is from Sanskrit. And so the Tibetan tradition says that among those 4 languages, these sutras, Prajnaparamita Sutras, are written in Sanskrit, and they consider that to be the highest canonical language for Buddhism. That's just a kind of almost a cultural view of the language. Now then, there's something very interesting about the word. So we're talking about Prajnaparamita. So in the commentaries, and this distinction is something that it's found in Indian philosophical treatises. So there says, there are probably more, but here he says, in terms of how the word Prajnaparamita is used, there's 4 different usages. So one is Rangshin Scherchi. It's the Prajnaparamita, which is identifies the ultimate nature of things. So Prajnaparamita can be a term that refers to emptiness itself. Yeah. So that's it probably has something to do with the fact that the awareness of emptiness and emptiness are not separate. So you can refer to the wisdom that perceives emptiness, or rather you can refer to the emptiness that wisdom perceives by the name for the wisdom that perceives it. If that makes sense. So that's one of the usages. Then the other 3 are the ones that are more kind of more familiar or more widely described, saying the scriptural form of Prajnaparamita. So the scriptural form or the scriptural use of the word Prajnaparamita refers to those classes, that class of discourses which are teaching about the subject, which is Prajnaparamita. But those are words, those are texts, those are words, those are texts which are formulations of words. And real Prajnaparamita is not the words that are used to describe Prajnaparamita. Nevertheless, that's one meaning of the term Prajnaparamita. It's used to refer to the sutras that are the scriptures that describe and talk about that subject. Then the latter 2 are the real meanings, the true meanings of Prajnaparamita. One is the path form of Prajnaparamita, and the 4th final one is the resultant form of Prajnaparamita. So the path form of Prajnaparamita said the Lam Shirjin said the Techen Pakwe Gul Mandoyo Marwa.
Lam Shirjin said Tashi Jabar Jinni said the Semeshi. Solam Jaju Semeju Lam Shirjin
so the path form of Prajnaparamita is
저는 충분다 대요. 충분다 징내 먹어요. 그래서 충분히 징이 샘삼바 되어와. 다 징내야 동안이 동안. 국민들의 시합 시스템에 세배 있어. 국민들의 시합 시스템에 세배 있어.
제fat성의 인구를
아. 제fat성의 인구.
삼중미시라의 인구만.
아.
삼중미시라의 인구 매버.
삼중미시라의 인구. 국민들의 시합 시스템에 세배 있어. 아까 조남 연재. 대신 조남 연재. 대신 조남 연재에 전주 세배 주가만 마음시기처럼. 그래서 대신 조남 나 돈이마도 외워라. 돈이마도 외워라. 대신 조남을 샘삼을 주면 대신 조남 외워라. 어디서 또 많이 들어오나. 국민들의 시합
조남만 있나 아니 갈사.
대신 조남 국민들의 시합. 국민들의 시합 수리 내주 세조와 규토와다. 대신 조남 또 뒤넘수지.
So the path form of Prajnaparamita is just defined as Techen Semkeiki Simba. Techen Semkeiki Simba means it's a form of knowledge, it's a form of awareness, it's a form of wisdom. It's actually mind consciousness, but it's mind consciousness which is accompanied by. So Techen Semkeiki Simba means it is influenced. It is under the influence of bodhicitta. Right? Bodhicitta is itself defined as the aspiration to achieve Buddhahood. So when you have Prajnaparamita in your mind, the object is not Buddhahood. The object is emptiness. So it means you have to have developed bodhicitta initially, and with your mind under the influence of that motivation, then be focused on an awareness of emptiness. So it means the awareness of the bodhisattva, which means the awareness of emptiness in the mind of a bodhisattva, which is under the influence of bodhicitta, which is being supported by bodhicitta. So then I was asking Rinpoche, well, does that have to be an arya? He said, no, it does not have to be an arya. It can occur at any point along the path, but it has to be a correct understanding of emptiness. So you can be, for instance, and why do we say that? Well, because you could be a person who adheres to the Yogacara philosophy, for instance. If you adhere to the Yogacara philosophy, your idea of ultimate truth is not empty. It's something else. You can be a bodhisattva who holds the Yogacara view. If you're a bodhisattva who holds the Yogacara view, you are Mahayanist. You are on the path. But you do not have the path form of Prajnaparamita because your view, your understanding is not a correct understanding of emptiness. Then that correct understanding of emptiness doesn't have to be direct realization. It doesn't have to be even correct inferential realization. It just has to be a correct understanding of emptiness, unerring understanding of emptiness that is supported by bodhicitta. So that's the path form of Prajnaparamita. The Mahayana path begins with generating bodhicitta, but the path form of Prajnaparamita begins when you achieve a correct understanding of emptiness supported by that bodhicitta. Okay? So that's one point. Then the fourth form of Prajnaparamita is that awareness in the mind of a Buddha. So a Buddha has a form of, he has bodhicitta, he has a direct realization of emptiness, that is the perfected form of that wisdom, and so that is the highest form of Prajnaparamita. So Prajnaparamita can refer to any one of those four things. It can refer to the emptiness itself, it can refer to the wisdom that correctly perceives that emptiness and is supported by bodhicitta, it can refer to scripture, and it can refer, yeah, that's the four. So then in the commentaries, so they take the word Prajnaparamita, so say paramita, right? What is the word para? What does paramita mean? So param, and it has two parts to it: param and ita. So param, it means paro. It means paro. It means like the far side of something. Ita is the past participle of the verb to go. So it means gone. Nevertheless, so gone to the far side is what it literally means. But there's two ways of interpreting that word that usually means gone, as in the past participle. So one is taking that participle and using it as an agent. And so it's not the point at which you've already reached the far side, but it is the agent which causes you to reach the far side. So that's interpreting the word paramita as meaning that form of knowledge which causes you to reach to the far side, meaning to transcend ordinary existence and become enlightened. And then there is a second interpretation which interprets paramita in terms of the object. And the object means the goal. It means Buddhahood itself. So one meaning of paramita, Prajnaparamita, is that wisdom which has been brought to the highest level of development, meaning Buddhahood itself. And the second interpretation is that wisdom which causes you to progress towards that goal. So one is interpreting it as an active participle, and one is interpreting it as the object that is being sought. So this is a philosophical interpretation of the term paramita as it pertains to the name of the sutra.
어다 코르 부수소와 가르치는 견론이 유디 전부다 자주스의 유디 전부 좋아 어 대대지 탑주기 주변 아 대대지 가라다 간제 어다비 코르 부수소와 아니 내가 대대지 가는 게 최 부수소와 싫어하는 거 그래서 딱 간제 이 가는 것은 딱 간제 코르 부수소와 시 어디 부수소와 시 어디 어디 되게 전에 뒤치를 가라제 아 투모는 단 링시디 네네 자격값 자격 공부리가 gelombi günü çabuk dansla var. Hatta de gelombi günü çabuk da çocuk günü çabuk niye var? gelombi günü çabuk da çocuk günü çabuk var. de da gelombi günü çabuk suyunu da şerif kullanıyor da bence gelombi namazı da mavuş şu var. 다 자주스의 근데 자주다들 결혼 말하듯이 가서 자주스의 결혼 말하듯이 자주스의 근데라고 가해서나 네가 소리 가서 그래 사 와 결혼 나머지 많이 사방을 따르면 셰리부가 다 저거 와 셰리부 여러 왔지 셰리부 사람 제레시라 소가 되게 많은 자주스가 되는 거고 여러 어디가 사이 나머지 자주스가 되는 거고 이제 아니 자주스의 근데 전부 다 어다 되게 so 내가 되나 아니 얘기가 가서 그래 탐주도 쉬도 해서 어다 딩식이 투모링식이
awesome. So now getting into the scripture, the first part of the scripture is called the I don't know. I'm sure there's a word for it. What would you call it? It refers to the circumstances and the occasion when the discourse was given. So there's a word for it in Tibetan or in Sanskrit called nidana. So nidana means kind of describing when and where the scripture was taught. Yeah, the circumstances. I guess for lack of a better word, maybe there's some other word. At any rate, that's what it's referring to. So it's not the teaching itself, but it's describing when it took place and where it took place. So the first part of, so you have to remember, we're saying every word of this sutra is the word of the Buddha. On the other hand, this part of the sutra includes words which the Buddha didn't say. It's where it starts out by saying, how do we translate? Thus did I hear on a certain occasion. So thus did I hear on a certain occasion, and I have like one page of the translation that you handed out. I'm not sure how you have it written there, but
either introduction or prologue.
Sorry?
About either introduction or prologue.
Yeah, it's like part of it's the introduction to the discourse itself. So this very first statement saying, "Thus did I hear on a certain occasion," is the first part of this introduction. So in the outline that this commentator gives, he says there is the standard part of an introduction, and there is the unique part of the introduction. So there's the standard part of the introduction, means those elements of the introduction that are typically cited in every discourse. So almost every sutra starts out so thus did I hear on a certain occasion. So that's saying that there's a certain sense of time. There's a reference to the teacher, meaning the Buddha. There's a reference to the place where the discourse was given, and there's a reference to who is in the audience, who are the persons that were gathered to hear the discourse. So these four elements are part of this sort of standard part of the introduction. So in terms of the first part, which makes reference to the time, so it says in Duchigna, it says in Tibet, Duchigna means on a certain occasion, at a certain time. And then before that it says, thus did I hear, thus have I heard, meaning that someone is rehearsing, someone is repeating what the discourse was. So what is that a reference to? So this is an interesting way Rinpoche described it. He said, actually, there is a quality that that is attainable by spiritual practitioners. It's called dharana. So there's something called dharani, right? Dharani is a word for a certain kind of mantra, but there's a mental attribute which in Sanskrit is called dharana. In Tibetan it's called sum, and it means the ability to retain. I translate it as retention, and what it means is it's sometimes described in Tibetan. It's called mijebe sum. Mijebe sum, in English we would say, there's a photographic memory where you can remember everything that you see. There's also an auditory ability to remember word for word, without mistake, exactly what you heard. This is it's considered not necessarily a form of clairvoyance, but it's a mental attribute that a person can achieve through powers of concentration. And so a person who achieves that, the quality is usually described as saying, no matter how many teachings they've ever heard from a teacher, they will never forget any word of a discourse that was given. So saying that during the time of the Buddha, there were many such disciples. And so none of the teachings were ever written down. And so they were transmitted orally. The disciples would recite them, and then other disciples would just listen to what was being recited, and then they would learn them that way. But there was also a circumstance at which, in a later period of time, the number of disciples who had that power of recollection, that ability to remember exactly the words that the Buddha used in a discourse, was dwindling. So then the existing Sangha, of course this is after the time of the Buddha's Nirvana, then the Sangha got together and they said, well, we have to have, what do they call them? It's a convention, almost like a convention, where the Sangha would come together and they were going to collect all the teachings which the Buddha gave. And so they invited, historically there was supposed to have been 3. And then at different occasions, then a particular disciple, there are a lot of stories about how the sutras were, codified. So that's what this phrase, thus did I hear on a certain occasion. That's where it came from. It came from when the monks, the Sangha, got together to codify the Buddha's word. So it says, thus have I heard, is an indication of a disciple who still had that power of recollection, where he could be counted on to repeat the exact words that the Buddha used in the discourse. And then it said, on a certain occasion, that's meant to convey that, in fact, it took place at a certain time, but also when he uses the occasion, when he uses the phrase a certain time, in Tibetan it means on one occasion, then that's meant to indicate that these discourses were rare. They were not taught multiple times or taught frequently. So this was taught on a certain time. This very incredible, extraordinary discourse was given. And then, so that's the first part, and that's identifying the occasion. Then the second point is the place. So, the teacher. And then it says, if you take the translation, it says, the Bhagavan. So the Bhagavan is referring to Buddha Shakyamuni. It's saying, the Bhagavan was staying, it means the Buddha traveled around and stayed in different places. When he gave discourse, he was staying at a certain place near the capital of a certain king, Bimbisara of the kingdom of Magadha, and that city was called Rajagir. So he was staying near Rajagir. There was a very famous bamboo grove which was given to the Sangha, but in this particular case, very nearby the city, there is this small mountain. It's called Vulture Peak. So the Buddha was staying on Vulture Peak in the vicinity of Rajagir. So that's identifying the teacher and the place. And then the fourth part of this common form of the introduction is who was the audience. Hora means who were the listeners. And so then it says two types of persons are identified. Doesn't give a number. It says a certain number of great bhikshus, means a certain number of human beings who were disciples of the Buddha who had taken the vow of a fully ordained monk. And then it says, in addition to the bhikshus, then there is also then a great collection of bodhisattvas, right? So that great collection of bodhisattvas refers to beings who were not necessarily monks. And so in particular, they could be gods. They could have been, great spiritual beings that were not humans, worldly gods that would come to listen to the Buddha's discourses. In addition to that, then other great bodhisattvas who were divine beings, like the great bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, who is the main interlocutor in the sutra, right? So Avalokiteshvara in particular would have been a member of the great bodhisattva sangha. So then that is identifying the four elements of the general circumstances or introduction for the sutra. And Rinpoche said also, it's generally recognized that the Kadu Waputi Jambere, Kadu Waputi Jambere Sundara. So the person who said, "Thus as I heard," in the case of this sutra, is identified as Manjushiri.
어디지? 나 이슈들라 투무 많이 만들다. 투무 많이 받는다. 단계나 지나 sabje 숨쉬다. 강이 지내나를 띵인지. 강을 지내나를 강사. 지날 지내나를 주숨지. 이기다. 마 강고 강이 지내나를 띵인지 세야니 와다. 강이 지내나를 띵인지 세야 가르스. 어다디 대로디 대대제 좀내들 사모나고 제제 띵에서는 요거 슈소스 어디 나타지 대세세 유디 주 자발이서 좀내들 수유가 되게 자발 사모세 유디 나타지 유 동마니 나와세 유디 나타지 유제 띵에서 나오다 되게 나머 주디 남다리 띵에서는 요거 슈소스 되게 영차 슈거 되게 진짜라고 들었대네 와 가르쳐 나 셔리보다 뭐가 셔리보다 아니 제스가 저 진짜 제가 미워라 어디 비슷한 단들이 두고 많이 가서네 가게 지제는 띵이 있어야 돼요.
So then the second part of the introduction is the unique elements of this particular discourse that are not common to other discourses. So the unique introduction here says there's three elements to it. One is the one-pointed concentration that the Buddha was absorbed in, and by virtue of which the discourse took place. So by virtue of the Buddha entering into that one-pointed concentration on emptiness, then that inspired or influenced Shariputra to ask Avalokiteshvara, how does someone practice Prajnaparamita? And it also inspired Avalokiteshvara how to respond to Shariputra. So the discourse, it has the appearance of being a conversation between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, but it's considered to be the word of the Buddha because the words which they exchanged were voiced by the blessing of the Buddha's concentration. So that's one point. So the second point is then, who were the persons that were influenced by that concentration? And that is, of course, Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra, right? And then it says here it says particular, it says Shariputra, and what is the way in which he was blessed by that concentration, and then how he was blessed was what prompted him to ask the question, and then in addition, what led to the answers that he got from Avalokiteshvara in response to his question.
강이 지내라는 띵이지. 강가 지내라는 강사수는 다 셔리부는 다 셔리부가 다 되게 좋아. 야 꼬야게. 그리고 간지 수위 지내다 벌써나 다 산재기 강사 근데 산재기 수유세 되고 봐. 산재기 수유가 지내다. 다 지내다 벌써요. 다 당연히 간지 지내다도 다 간지다 벌써나 다 지외 주다. 제외니 다 제외 주디라 가서 거래. 다 제외 주디고 양 대세 전주선거 선거치고 방관지에서 운주 셔라지 바로도 실버사면 저번이나 나마 다시 부모하고 대단 많이 동원하고 양가고 따오스 어디 뒤 다리 양 대세 양 대세에서 이렇게 가다보서는 좀 내대 사문 나와 땅은 사문 당 뒤지 나면서 됐어요. 사문 나와 띵에서 누가 쇼스나요? 사문 나와 띵에서 누가 쇼 사무세인데 이게 가서 동원이지. 와. 아니 나와서 대주시. 다가 대주가 동바의 대주니 다 간제. 동바의 대주니 디케시 그러니까 가래서 동바 윤제의 제외 도안에 인중 제도야. 인중 윤제의 제외 도는 동바 제도야. 와다 동바의 인중이 다 지도서 지도를 지도고야 가서 왜냐면은 동바이 도야 왜냐면은 디인자 사무 나와서 대세 좀때 사무 나와 제샤가 사무세 동바이 되체 나와서 이렇게다 가서 인중 되체 어다 디니니 거 된데도 돈이 아니 너무 슈슈레스 양 대세서요도 양 대세서요도 좀때 대서 슈가 대서 마세 대내가 되나야 자주서 맞서 봐봐 제레스 운주 셔를 포드 지금 상비 줘봐니네 운주게야 와 자주서 맞서 봐봐 제레스 운주게야 아니 셔를 포드 지금 상비 줘봐 되나야 나마다 데스 나마다시 나마다 와서 마세 공모하고 대단 난시 부모하고 대단한 난시지 동반나고 따오고 따오 레스타 가지 어디 딱 간다디 부모하고 대단 라이언스 라이언이 부모하고 대단 라이언스 라이언이 양가게 가능성은 강사들 당신을 따오 좀 마세 와 강사들 당신을 따오 좀 마세 강사 강 다음에 당시 풍부대한 당시 나봐야 딱 강사 다음에 주 다음에 얘가 또 주고 간다디 부모하고 대단 라이언스인데 와 강사 당신을 따와 좀더 마세 부모하고 강사 받았다고 당시 부모하고 대단야 당시 도망을 한번
So in addressing this unique part of the introduction, so it says first of all, so what was the one-pointed concentration that inspired or blessed or served as an influence to prompt the discourse that the exchange that took place between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. So it says, at that time, at that time means at the time that was already described when Buddha was staying on Vulture Peak. Then it says the Buddha was absorbed in a one-pointed concentration, in a particular one-pointed concentration, which is called Samonawa. Samonawa is the name of that concentration. So Samo means profound. Nawa means perception. So the perception of the profound. So many forms of one-point concentrations are given a particular name, and the name of that concentration indicates something about what the nature of that one-pointed concentration is. So this particular name indicates several things. In one way, it's interpreted as saying that, of course, when the profound is referring to emptiness itself. So saying the Buddha was absorbed one-pointedly in meditation on direct perception of emptiness. Then the second word in the name of the concentration, the so-called perception of the profound. Then the word perception can be understood to mean the things which are perceived by ordinary awareness, right? Then those are the things that make up relative truth objects and which are subject to the doctrine of dependent origination, right? Tenjel. So Tenjel, dependent origination, has a number of levels of meaning to it. So the simple or the more conventional level of emptiness, of dependent origination, is talking about ignorance and karma and consciousness producing rebirth in the 12 limbs of dependent origination. No. So, and a deeper level of dependent origination is to say that those things, those objects that appear to the mind, those dualistic objects that are perceptions, then those are also referred to as nawa. Nawa means those things that appear to the mind or are perceived by the mind. Then those objects, what is their ultimate nature? Their ultimate nature is not that they have a self-existent essence, but rather that their entire existence is then topetaktam, or dashi topalatene juma. So it's saying that. So it means that they are only nominally existent. They are mere names, and that some set of conditions leads you to perceive them, and that's how you form the awareness of dualistic objects. So, for instance, in the case of the individual, of a person, the sense of self depends upon you experiencing your five skandhas. You experience your body, you feel your body, you experience your mind, you experience your own thoughts, and based on those experiences, then comes the idea that you are some kind of individual that is the experiencer of the body and the mind. And there's a sense of your individuality that arises in your mind. And that sense of self, it produces the notion of a self. The idea of your own individuality. So that when that idea appears in your mind, you think that there's a real self. But that notion of a self only exists because of your five skandhas. It's preceded by experiencing your five skandhas. So those five skandhas are the necessary condition that leads you to form a sense of your individuality. I mean, there's something unique about how you experience your 5 skandhas that makes you think they're your own. Nobody else experiences them, just you. But that you that you think is experiencing them, the only reason there is a you is because you experience the 5 skandhas. So that you is not a real thing. That you is just a name, just an object, just like a phantasm, just like an illusion that comes into your mind because of some conditions. So and the meaning of it is that if you understand emptiness correctly, emptiness does not mean that things don't exist. Really understanding emptiness correctly means things exist. They don't exist by way of a real essence. So it's not negating existence. It's only negating self-existence. And by negating self-existence, in a way, it's affirming that it does exist, but only conventionally. And by the same token, when you understand relative truth objects, if you understand them correctly, you understand that they don't exist by way of a real essence, but they exist. So this interpretation is saying that you cannot understand emptiness if you think emptiness is rejecting the notion of dependent origination. And you can't understand dependent origination if you think it is a doctrine that is not implying emptiness. So those two elements actually are two sides of the same coin, and they are meant to properly underpin. Each one underpins the other one. It's saying each one affirms the validity of the other. Ultimate truth affirms the validity of conventional truth. Understanding conventional truth correctly affirms that it's not self-existent. Its true nature is emptiness. So the point that's being made here is the name of this concentration, perception of the profound, can be understood to be a reference to the fact that emptiness is the true nature of dependent origination, and the true meaning of dependent origination is that things are void of any self-existence. So then Tsongkhapa wrote in his famous poem, The 3 Principal Elements of the Path, that as long as you continue to think that of those two ideas, So Tsongkhapa So there's a very famous, which doesn't want to, it's a really beautiful series of verses from Tsongkhapa's poem, and we could stop and just talk about them now, but Rinpoche doesn't want to use the time to do it. But basically it's saying, if you think that the infallible cause and effect doctrine that is part of the teaching of dependent origination is something that is distinct from the notion of emptiness, which is that there's no adherence to any self-existent object. That if you think that those two things are separate, if in your mind they seem to be saying different things, if you still have that idea that cause and effect is not completely consonant with emptiness, then you don't have a correct understanding of right view. And then the next verse says, when the mere kind of awareness of things are causally dependent triggers in your mind the understanding that that means they're not self-existent, then you have reached the point where you have a correct understanding of right view. So then what just said, unpacking what those verses are saying, we should probably leave it for tomorrow when we're talking more about subject, the main subject matter of emptiness itself. Here we're just talking about the introduction and the name of the concentration that Buddha Shakyamuni is absorbed in. And then it says, and also at that time, the Bodhisattva, the Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, was, what does it say? He was closely observing the following, and saying he was closely observing the fact that the 5 heaps, and there's a word and, so it says, and he was closely observing that the 5 skandhas, or the 5 heaps, are empty of any self-existent nature. So then the word and in the sutra, in some commentaries is saying, of course it means, in one way you can take it as saying, it's a conjunction that links the previous sentence, which says that our Avalokiteshvara was engaging in the practice of profound wisdom, and then the next sentence says, and at that time he was perceiving or observing that the 5 heaps are empty of any real essence. So the word and there can just be this transition from the one sentence to the other, but there's one commentarial explanation which says the and there can be interpreted also to mean and he was perceiving the 5 heaps, means it implies he was also perceiving that the individual self is empty of any self-existent nature. So he was perceiving that the self lacks any self-existent nature, and he was perceiving, in addition to the self, the 5 skandhas are also void of any self-existent nature. So there's that interpretation that is given to the words of the sutra also.
Just now, see, that you need to get now talk to you. Share with the moment, share with the chairs, you want to say, but the Georgian say that it is first knows the world. teaching and again, also for the channel.
Land is just not casting. Jingle got the
Jingle car said the Tapana, Harso Sherry Pugita, Juataya, Tikona, the individual. Who the individual Chanjus in the Jova, that was the Jova chair, the days that we Juata over the Duva, never ready in that genetic things in Namshina shall teach it in our Telate, two things in our Telate for the day church. That another house over the Jason now with the Tapas, Jomedi, now switching that George in the chair. Oh, Chelsea, Cherry Bundi, George, just not that you sit down. Come away all day, let's say, Jomedi has a division of this in there. Our dish of the Ramashan was so. Junala, Taran, they did some damages and she will use. Genosora, that other day, Casol Cadilla, Sumaza, Jesuna, Chijila, Shedusuna. The other day, then the Sanjay two, then the Sanjay two. Said that the Mashari Plugi, Sanjus and Masama, Papa Cheres, Uchula, and the Division. Yes, I did love Richiku, Kalala. Shera Japan Rich Post, Suda Suines, Kalala, Suda Suine, Shera Japan Chiba, Samichova, Java, Deva, Tova, Chidana, Yes, Tabaka, of Joina, Sojuni, Solan, the Jolani Negaso, and this Samichova Hadis, Java Hadis Laboria, Tolan Negas Hadila, Polan Negas Hadila, Yes, that Java delivery. That later you do Mana Chile, Kala Dubola, Tiva did not see that. Well, nobody never the chair you did. Social Negaso, Solan the Jolan Negaso, Kadich, Java Kadich, Poland and Poland and what did you do? And the Java Dova did, and in Chidala Cha, the guest never asked. What did you want with it? He said, what it is that, and it is
No. Okay, so then we're still talking about the unique introduction, right? The special circumstances that pertain to this particular teaching, which was given between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. So then this description of the unique part of the introduction set was described as what was the concentration by the power of which the blessing was conferred on particularly Shariputra to ask the question, and then following that, what was how were the questions raised, and then thirdly, what was the nature of the exchange between the two of them. And so we already talked about the manner in which Shariputra was influenced by the power of Buddha Shakyamuni's one-point concentration on emptiness. So that's what prompted him to ask the question. So this brings us to the point where the commentators identify different forms of the so-called word of the Buddha. So there's one is called the speech, which is inspired by the Buddha or created by the power of the Buddha, by the power of the Buddha's blessing. That's called Jigilabeka. So I think, I don't know if it was here, but recently there was mention was made of that sometimes the Buddha could cause the sound of Dharma words to emanate from inanimate objects. And so that would be an example of the word of the Buddha was not being spoken by even a living being. Like the sound of the wind through the trees would be heard to be expressing the sound, all things are impermanent, and so on. Here, the form of speech that was inspired by blessing is what prompted Shariputra to ask a question. Because Shariputra is understood to be a follower of the Hinayana path. Also, Shariputra, it's also recognized that Shariputra was the disciple who had He's also considered to be the disciple whose wisdom among the Hinayana disciples was the most sharpest intellect, most powerful wisdom among the disciples. And yet, Shariputra did not know of his own awareness how to practice Prajnaparamita. So here is the case where the Buddha's blessing prompted Shariputra to wonder to himself, to ask himself the question. He sees that Avalokiteshvara, the great Bodhisattva, is also engaged in meditation. He's meditating on the emptiness of the 5 skandhas, for instance, as the sutra mentions. And so he thinks to himself, Avalokiteshvara must be practicing Prajnaparamita. I don't know about Prajnaparamita. Let me ask him. So that the inspiration to ask that question and the words that came out of his mouth, where he says to Avalokiteshvara, how should a son of good family who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom train himself? So those words that were uttered by Shariputra are described or identified as the word of the Buddha. They were not spoken by the Buddha, but they are the word of the Buddha in that the Buddha's concentration prompted Shariputra to ask this particular question. And so the Buddha wanted Shariputra to ask this question. Shariputra would not have asked this question except for the fact that the Buddha inspired him to do so. And so therefore, it's considered to be the Buddha's own word. Then there's another kind of speech. So then the speech that Avalokiteshvara gives also are words that are coming out of Avalokiteshvara's mouth. When he answers Shariputra, and he tells him, well, if you want to practice, the person who's practicing Prajnaparamita should cultivate the following kind of knowledge. So those words are coming from Avalokiteshvara's mouth, but they're also considered the word of the Buddha. And they're considered the word of the Buddha, the type of the word of the Buddha, which is sanctioned word of the Buddha, meaning that the Buddha was, it's like the word that we use for the ritual today, was to give permission. So it's the Buddha gave permission for Avalokiteshvara to make this, teaching, to give this teaching on emptiness by virtue of the fact that he understood that the Buddha would not have objected, that the Buddha permitted him to speak about it in his presence. Normally, in the presence of your teacher, you would not, on your own, start giving some kind of a teaching. It would be up to the master to be the one who would give a discourse. So here, Buddha's not speaking. But Avalokiteshvara understood that Buddha did not object. Buddha gave permission. Buddha sanctioned. So this is called permitted speech. So, and permitted speech by someone other than the Buddha, but speech which was that would be expressing something that the Buddha himself might express. And so in that sense, in the presence of the Buddha, spoken by someone else, but it's understood or it's recognized or thought of as having the same weight as if the Buddha had said it himself. And then there's also a third kind of speech, which is words that that come from the Buddha's own mouth. And that comes in this sutra, that comes at the very end, when Buddha arises from his meditation and voices his approval for what Avalokiteshvara did. Sadhu, sadhu, he says to him, good what you said. Then those are what the Buddha said. And then he says, yes, what you have said represents a proper description and explanation of how to practice. So these are all elements that occur in the sutra, and are meant to be recognized as all having the same force as if they had been spoken by the Buddha. So we're kind of out of time. Past Krishnadhargya's deadline that he gave us. Hopefully he will not scold us for going to 4:30. At any rate, maybe this is a good place to stop for today.